Ted Cruz just made the biggest mistake of his political career. He called a civil rights attorney who's represented over 5,000 Texans in court an unqualified DEI hire on Lev television. Her response, "Senator, let's discuss why you fled Texas while your constituents froze to death." What happened next will end his Senate career forever. Smash that like button because you're about to witness a public defender with 15 years of courtroom experience systematically destroy a senator with evidence he cannot deny. Ted Cruz thought he could bully a freshman congresswoman. He thought his Ivy League degrees made him superior. He thought being senior senator gave him authority. He was wrong. When you attack someone who spent years examining witnesses, defending the powerless, and fighting for civil rights, you better come with more than condescension and privilege. This decorated civil rights attorney just exposed everything about Ted Cruz that Texas voters have suspected for years. The Cancun abandonment, the January 6th treachery, the podcast grift, the cowardice, the fake populism hiding elite privilege. This is bigger than one political confrontation. This is the day Texas discovered the difference between someone who actually serves the people and someone who only serves themselves. It was a typical Thursday evening on CNN. But what happened during State of Texas? A political reckoning would fundamentally expose the rot at the heart of Texas Republican leadership. The show's producers had set up what they thought would be a standard debate about Texas representation and state politics. On one side, Senator Ted Cruz, the senior senator from Texas, Harvard Law graduate, former Supreme Court clerk, 12 years in the Senate, presidential candidate in 2016, the embodiment of political ambition wrapped in populist rhetoric. On the other side, Representative Jasmine Crockett, the freshman congresswoman from Texas's 30th District representing Dallas, civil rights attorney, former public defender, led the historic Texas House quorum break for voting rights, rising star of the Democratic Party. Host Jake Tapper opened with questions about Texas representation and the growing divide between urban and rural areas. Cruz positioned himself as the voice of all Texans, speaking in that practice tone politicians use when they're trying to sound folksy despite Ivy League educations. You see, Jake, Cruz began, his voice dripping with a kind of condescension that had made him the most disliked man in the Senate. Texas is changing, but not all change represents the will of the people. Some changes represent the coastal elite agenda being imposed on hardworking Texans. Crockett responded with the precision of someone who'd spent 15 years in courtrooms dismantling weak arguments. "Senator, I represent Dallas, the economic engine of Texas. I've represented over 5,000 Texans in court, including 400 peaceful protesters pro bono. I think I understand what Texans want." That's when Cruz made his fatal error. He smiled, that patronizing smile that colleagues from both parties had learned to despise, and leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone who'd never been truly challenged. "Congresswoman, with all due respect," he began, and everyone watching knew nothing respectful was coming next. "Being a DEI hire doesn't qualify you to lecture senators on representing Texas. You're a freshman. You've been in Congress less than 2 years. Some of us have actually earned our positions through merit and experience." The studio fell silent. Even Jake Tapper, who'd moderated hundreds of contentious debates, looked genuinely shocked by the brazenness of the attack. But Jasmine Crockett didn't react the way Cruz expected. She didn't get angry. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, her expression shifted into something every defense attorney who'd worked with her would recognize immediately. Prosecutor mode. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Her posture straightened. When she spoke, her voice carried the calm, measured authority of someone who'd examined hostile witnesses 1,000 times. "Senator Cruz," she said, each word deliberate and precise, "I've represented over 5,000 Texans in court. I was a public defender before you ever cared about working-class people. I've defended families of police brutality victims. I've taken pro bono cases for peaceful protesters. I was licensed to practice law in 3 jurisdictions before you decided being a senator was a good stepping stone to the presidency." She paused, reaching into her briefcase with the same methodical precision she'd used entering evidence in trials. "Since you want to question my qualifications and my experience representing Texans," she continued, pulling out a thick folder, "let's discuss your record of representing Texas." She held up the folder so the camera could see the label, "Senator Ted Cruz, Timeline of Abandonment." Let's start with February 20 or 21, Crockett said, her attorney voice cutting through the studio like a scalpel. When your constituents were freezing to death in their homes, when children were dying from hypothermia, when elderly Texans were burning furniture to stay warm, Cruz tried to interrupt, his confident smile completely gone. That's been thoroughly. Has it, though? Senator Crockett's voice rose just slightly, the way a prosecutor does when they're about to present the kill shot. Because I have the timeline. I have your wife's text messages. I have the photos. And most importantly, I have the truth about what you did when Texas needed you most. The power dynamic in the studio had shifted completely. Ted Cruz, who moments ago had been patronizing a younger colleague, suddenly looked like a defendant who just realized the prosecutor had receipts. You fled to Cancun, Crockett said simply. While Texans froze to death, you went to a beach resort, and when you got caught, you lied about it. Jake. Tapper leaned forward, recognizing that his show had just become the venue for something unprecedented. A civil rights attorney putting a senator on trial on live television. Senator Cruz, Tapper interjected. Congresswoman Crockett has made a serious accusation. Would you like to respond? But Cruz's usual quick response failed him. Because unlike the political theater, he was used to where both sides traded talking points and nothing really mattered. He was now facing someone with actual evidence. Someone trained to present facts. Someone who'd spent years in courtrooms where lies had consequences. And she was just getting started. Jasmine Crockett opened her folder with the practiced precision of someone who'd presented hundreds of cases to skeptical juries. This wasn't political theater. This was a courtroom examination, and Ted Cruz was the hostile witness. Let me walk America through what actually happened in February 2021. Crockett began, her voice carrying the authoritative tone that had won cases against far more skilled opponents than Cruz. Because the truth is far worse than the senator wants you to remember. She produced the first document, holding it up for the camera. This is the National Weather Service alert issued February 14, 2021. Historic winter storm approaching Texas, record low temperatures. Life-threatening conditions expected. On that same day, Crockett continued, Senator Cruz signed a letter to President Biden requesting a federal emergency disaster declaration. He was doing his job. He knew how serious this was. She pulled out the next document, February 15, 16. The crisis unfolds. 4 million Texans lose power. Temperatures plunge into single digits. The Texas power grid, which the senator has consistently defended against federal regulation, fails catastrophically. Cruz tried to interject. The power grid failures were due to I'm not asking you questions yet. Senator Crockett cut him off with the authority of someone who'd controlled courtroom proceedings. I'm presenting evidence. You'll have your chance to respond. She produced photographs that CNN displayed on screen. This is what Texas looked like while you were packing your bags. People huddled in cars for warmth. Families burning furniture to stay warm. Children sleeping in coats because their homes had no heat. The images were devastating. Frozen homes. People wrapped in blankets, empty store shelves. February 17, 2021 evening, Crockett continued her timeline as precise as any prosecutor's. While millions of Texans remained without power, Senator Cruz boards a United Airlines flight from Houston to Cancun. She held up printouts of the famous photographs. These photos went viral overnight. The senator at the airport on the plane with a carry-on suitcase, not exactly just escorting the kids' luggage. Here's where it gets interesting, Crockett said, and there was a sharp edge to her voice. Now, the senator's initial story was that his daughters asked to go. He was being a good dad, and he was flying back immediately. She produced screenshots of text messages. But your wife's text messages told a different story, didn't they, Senator? The texts appeared on screen. Heidi Cruz organizing a Cancun trip through Sunday, inviting friends, discussing the resort they'd visited before. These messages, Crockett explained to the camera, show this was a planned getaway through Sunday, not a dad escorting his kids, a family vacation while Texas suffered. Cruz's face had gone red. Those were private messages that your wife sent to neighbors who then shared them with media, Crockett interrupted. And they prove you lied to the American people about why you went and when you plan to return. She pulled out flight records. Your original return flight was booked for Saturday, February 20th. 3 full days in Cancun while your state suffered. You only changed your ticket to return Thursday afternoon after the photos went viral and the outrage exploded. Let me read you your own statement. Crockett said, pulling out another document. With school count for the week, our girls asked to take a trip with friends. Wanting to be a good dad, I flew down with them last night and am flying back this afternoon. She looked directly at Cruz. That was a lie. You weren't planning to fly back that afternoon. You had returned tickets for 3 days later. You only came back because you got caught. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. Photographs, text messages, flight records, contemporaneous statements, all contradicting Cruz's story. But Crockett wasn't finished. Now, let's talk about the hypocrisy, she said and pulled out a printout of a tweet, December 2020, just 2 months before your Cancun trip. You sent this tweet about Austin Mayor Steve Adler. She read it aloud. Hypocrites! Complete and utter hypocrites, and don't forget to vote them out of office. You were attacking the mayor for traveling to Cabo during the pandemic while telling constituents to stay home. 2 months later, Crockett continued, her voice rising with controlled indignation. You did the exact same thing during a worse crisis when you were actually needed, when people were actually dying. She produced the casualty reports. At least 111 Texans died as a result of this storm, Senator. Some froze to death in their homes. Others died from carbon monoxide poisoning trying to stay warm. Children died. Elderly people died. Your constituents died. And where were you? Crockett demanded. At a Ritz-Carlton in Cancun. While Texans burned furniture for warmth, you were at a beachside resort. She turned to the camera, addressing viewers directly. You want to know the difference between a leader and a coward. Beto wasn't even in office at that time, but he organized wellness checks. He raised money. He coordinated volunteers. He made phone calls to elderly Texans. He showed up. Crockett looked back at Cruz. You fled and Texas has never forgotten. We call you Fled Cruz for a reason. Cruz attempted to mount a defense. I admitted it was a mistake. Only after you got caught. Crockett's voice cracked through the studio. Your statement didn't come until you were already on the plane back. You didn't show remorse. You showed regret at being caught. There's a difference, Senator. And here's what really matters. Crockett continued, lowering her voice to that deadly calm prosecutors use for closing arguments. You didn't just abandon Texans during a crisis. You lied about it. You blamed your daughters. You attacked others for doing the same thing you did, and you've never truly taken responsibility. She closed the folder on the Cancun evidence. But abandoning Texas during a deadly crisis is just one pattern in your career, Senator. Now, let's talk about how you tried to abandon democracy itself on January 6th. Jasmine Crockett reached for her second folder, this one notably thicker than the first. As a civil rights attorney who'd fought for voting rights, this section clearly carried personal weight. Senator Cruz, I spent 2021 fighting for voting rights in Texas, Crockett began, her voice carrying a new intensity. I was the lead architect of the Texas House quorum break. I walked out of the legislature to stop voter suppression. I put my political career on the line to defend democracy. She paused, letting that sink in. So I take special interest in what you did on January 6, 2021, when you tried to overturn a legitimate election. Cruz immediately tried to interrupt. I was exercising my constitutional right to object. You were the ringleader. Crockett cut him off sharply. Let me present the facts. She opened the folder and began laying out a timeline. After Josh Hawley became the first senator to announce he would object to the Electoral College certification, you came next. You organized a coalition of 11 Republican senators. You called for a 10-day emergency audit of the election results. On January 6th, as Congress convened to certify the election, you were leading the objection to Arizona's electoral votes. She produced the congressional record. You gave a speech on the Senate floor claiming that 39% of Americans believed the election was rigged. You called it a profound threat to the country. Then, Crockett continued, her voice building. At 2013 p.m., while you were making these arguments, supporters of President Trump, supporters who believed the lies you and others told them, breached the Capitol. She produced photographs of the chaos, rioters in the Capitol, broken windows, police officers being attacked. You were evacuated to a secure location, Crockett said. And here's where your own book betrays you, Senator. She held up a copy of Cruz's memoir. You wrote about hiding in, and I'm quoting your own words, a supply closet with stacked chairs. You met with your coalition to discuss what to do next. Some wanted to drop the objection after the violence, but you, again your own words, vehemently disagreed. You said, and I quote, "I'll be damned if I allow a handful of violent rioters to change our willingness to fulfill our constitutional responsibility." Crockett looked up from the book. "Noble words, Senator, except you're the one who helped create those rioters by lying to them about election fraud." She produced the final vote count. When the Senate reconvened that night, after 5 people had died, after police officers had been injured, after the Capitol had been desecrated, the vote to certify Arizona's electoral votes was 93-6. You, Senator, were one of the 6 who voted to reject Arizona's results even after the violence, even after the death, even after everything. "But wait," Crockett said, and there was something dangerous in her voice. "Now it gets worse." She pulled out news clips from January 2022, 1 year after the attack. You went on the Senate floor and called January 6th a violent terrorist attack. The clip played, Cruz's voice, "Those who assault law enforcement, and I'm saying this very specifically, are engaged in violent terrorist attacks." Tucker Carlson didn't like that, Crockett continued. "So you went on his show the very next night, and this is where we see who you really are." She played the Tucker Carlson clip. "Tucker, what the hell is going on here?" Cruz stammering. "The way I phrased things yesterday, it was sloppy and frankly it was dumb. You apologized," Crockett said slowly to Tucker Carlson, "for calling the January 6th attack terrorism. You called people who beat police officers and tried to overturn an election patriots to appease a Fox News host." She stacked all the documents together. "So, let me understand your position, Senator. You led the effort to overturn the election based on lies. You hid in a supply closet when the violence you helped incite erupted. You came back and voted to reject the results anyway. Then you called it terrorism. Then you apologized for calling it terrorism." Crockett leaned forward. "Which version is the truth, or do you just say whatever is politically convenient at any given moment?" 7 Democratic senators filed an ethics complaint against you and Josh Hawley, Crockett continued, producing the complaint. "It alleges that you made future violence more likely by lending legitimacy to false claims of fraud." "You dismissed it as political games," she said, "but here's what really happened. While the Capitol was under siege, your campaign was sending fundraising texts. Tom Cotton, a Republican, went on Fox News and said some senators were giving false hope to their supporters while sending out fundraising emails as insurrectionists literally stormed the Capitol. You were profiting off the crisis you helped create," Crockett charged. "Just like you profit off your podcast while sitting on the committee that regulates the company paying you." Cruz tried to respond. "I was exercising my constitutional duty." "Your constitutional duty?" Crockett's voice rose. Mitt Romney stood on the Senate floor that night and said, "Do we weigh our own political fortunes more heavily than we weigh the strength of our republic?" He was talking about you, Senator, though he was too polite to name you. Your fellow Republicans knew what you were doing, Crockett continued. Mitch McConnell opposed the objections. "You did it anyway for 2024 for your own ambitions, and people died because of the lies you helped spread." She produced one more document. Texas Tribune asked you in January 2022, "Do you believe the 2020 election was legitimate?" You refused to answer. 1 year after January 6th, you still wouldn't say Biden legitimately won. And when the Senate passed the Electoral Count Reform Act in 2022, a bill designed to prevent another January 6th, you were the sole Republican in committee to vote against it. You called it bad for democracy. Crockett shook her head in disbelief. The irony is breathtaking. You tried to overturn an election, hid during the riot, continued objecting after the violence, flip-flopped on calling it terrorism, and then voted against reforms to prevent it from happening again. She closed the folder, "But we're not done, Senator, because your pattern of self-deing extends beyond abandoning Texas and democracy. Let's talk about your podcast and the 630,000 that mysteriously shows up in your political committee." Jasmine Crockett's third folder was thinner but potentially more damning. Evidence of financial arrangements that blurred ethical lines in ways even Cruz's defenders couldn't easily explain away. Podcast called Verdict with Ted Cruz. "Is that correct?" Crockett began, her tone shifting to that of an attorney establishing basic facts for a jury. "I do," Cruz answered cautiously. "And you've repeatedly said you make no money from this podcast, correct? Called it a labor of love. That's correct?" I don't receive payment for the podcast. Technically true, Crockett said with a hint of a smile, but misleading as usual. She opened the folder and pulled out a Houston Chronicle article from 2024 last year. The Chronicle's investigation revealed something interesting. iHeartMedia, the massive radio network that picked up your podcast in 2022, has made regular payments to a superpass supporting your re-election. Crockett asked rhetorically, $638.50 or $630,800 to be precise, about 1/3 of your Truth and Courage Pass's total contributions. She let that number hang in the air. iHeartMedia says these payments are associated with ad revenue from the podcast. Crockett continued, so let me understand this arrangement. You host a podcast, you claim you don't get paid, but the company producing your podcast sends hundreds of thousands of dollars to a committee supporting your re-election. She pulled out more documentation. Here's where it gets interesting. From a legal perspective, Senate ethics rules prohibit you from accepting gifts from lobbyists. iHeartMedia has been registered as a lobbyist since 2002. And what committee do you serve on? Senator Crockett asked, though she clearly knew the answer. The Senate Commerce Committee, which regulates the communications industry, the same industry iHeartMedia is part of. She produced expert opinions from campaign finance attorneys. Ethics experts told the Chronicle, this appears to be a novel arrangement that blurs the lines between what is allowed under Senate ethics rules and campaign finance laws. The company produces and provides advertising for your show, Crockett explained. If you weren't a senator, you'd have to pay for that production. It's a valuable service. Some estimates put it at potentially millions of dollars in value, but you get it for free and then they pay your political committee $630,000. It's not direct payment to you, so technically you can say I don't get paid but you absolutely benefit. Your re-election campaign benefits from their payments. She leaned forward. Senator, I'm a lawyer. I know what money laundering logic looks like. This is it. Cruz tried to defend the arrangement. It's completely legal. My office consulted with ethics counsel. Legal and ethical aren't always the same thing. Crockett interrupted. You've found a loophole. You've structured an arrangement that technically complies with the letter of the law while violating its spirit, just like you technically came back from Cancun, even though you only did so after getting caught. Just like you technically didn't get paid by iHeartMedia, even though your campaign benefits from their payments. She produced another article. One advertiser pulled out of your podcast after learning the money was going to your political committee. They didn't want to be part of this scheme. This is the pattern. Senator Crockett said, gathering the documents, you find ways to benefit yourself while claiming you're serving others. You take the Cancun vacation, but say you're being a good dad. You try to overturn an election, but say you're defending the Constitution. You profit from your podcast, but say it's a labor of love. Everything is calculated for your personal benefit, disguised as something noble. She closed the folder. But perhaps the most revealing pattern in your career isn't the corruption, or the abandonment, or even the lies. It's the cowardice. And there's no better example than how you responded when Donald Trump attacked your family. Jasmine Crockett's fourth folder contained some of the most personally devastating material. Evidence not of corruption, but of character or the lack thereof. Senator Cruz, during the 2016 Republican primary, Donald Trump said some things about you and your family, Crockett. Began her voice taking on a different quality. Not prosectoral now, but almost terrible things. She pulled out headlines and quotes. He called you Lion Ted. He suggested your father was somehow involved in the JFK assassination. He shared an unflattering photo of your wife Heidi on social media. You responded forcefully. Crockett continued, reading Cruz's own words. You called Trump a pathological liar. You called him a narcissist. You said he was utterly immoral. At the Republican National Convention in 2016, you gave a speech where you told people to vote their conscience, which everyone understood meant don't vote for Trump. She looked up from the documents. You were right about him, Senator. Everything you said was true. Then Trump won, Crockett said, and you folded like a cheap suit. She produced photographs of Cruz making phone calls for Trump, campaigning for him, defending him. You became one of his most loyal defenders in the Senate. You never confronted him about your wife. You never demanded an apology for what he said about your father. The man insulted your family on national television, Crockett said, And there was genuine bewilderment in her voice. And you became his servant. She produced quotes from Cruz's Republican colleagues. John Boehner, the former Republican Speaker of the House, called you Lucifer in the flesh. He said, and I quote, "I have never worked with a more miserable son of A in my life." Lindsey Graham joked that if you killed Ted Cruz on the floor of the Senate and the trial was in the Senate, nobody would convict you. Crockett continued, reading more quotes. Bob Dole said, "Nobody likes you. Peter King called you a fraud. These aren't Democrats attacking you, Senator." Crockett emphasized, "These are your Republican colleagues, people from your own party, people who work with you every single day." She pulled out more evidence. Your former college roommate said he'd rather have someone selected at random than vote for you. Former staffers have leaked stories about your behavior. You're known as the most hated man in the Senate, and that's a bipartisan assessment. But the ultimate example of your self-interest came during the 2024 cycle, Crockett said, producing a news article. You proposed legislation requiring law enforcement to provide escorts for members of Congress through airport security 3 years after your Cancun trip. So, let me understand, Crockett said, you abandoned Texas during a crisis. You got mocked for it, fled Cruz, Cancun Cruz, and your response is to propose a law giving yourself special security escorts at airports. She shook her head. Even that had to be about you, about making your life easier, about getting special treatment. Here's what I see, Senator Crockett said, organizing all the evidence of his character. A man who wouldn't defend his own wife when she was attacked. A man who fled Texas when people needed him. A man who hid in a supply closet during a riot but came back to keep objecting to the election. A man who apologized to Tucker Carlson for calling an insurrection terrorism. Every decision you make is calculated for personal benefit. She continued, you became Trump's defender because you thought it would help you in 2024. You objected to the election for the same reason. You structured your podcast deal to profit while claiming you don't. You fled to Cancun because your family wanted a vacation and you thought you wouldn't get caught. Crockett leaned back. Senator, name one time you showed courage. One time you stood on principle against your own interest. One time you didn't calculate the political advantage before taking a position. Cruz started to respond, but Crockett cut him off. And don't say January 6. We've established that was about your 2024 ambitions. Don't say your conservative principles. You abandoned them when you joined Trump. Don't say serving Texas. You literally fled the state during a crisis. The silence in the studio was devastating. You want to know the real difference between us? Senator Crockett said, I walked out of the Texas legislature for voting rights. I knew it would be controversial. I knew Republicans would attack me. I did it anyway because it was right. You've never done anything like that, she continued. Every brave-sounding speech is calculated. Every bold position is focus grouped. Every move is designed to benefit Ted Cruz. She gathered the documents, but all of this, the cowardice, the corruption, the abandonment rests on one fundamental lie, the lie that you're some kind of working-class champion. So, let's talk about who you really are, Senator. Let's discuss your actual background. Jasmine Crockett's final folder was perhaps the most damaging of all because it struck at the core of Ted Cruz's political identity. His claim to be a champion of working-class Texans. Senator, you were born where? Crockett asked, already knowing the answer. Calgary, Alberta, Canada, Cruz answered reluctantly. Not Texas, Crockett clarified. Canada. You didn't move to Texas until you were 4 years old. She pulled out Cruz's biography. Your father, Rafael Cruz, was a petroleum engineer who fled Cuba. Successful man, not working class. Your mother also worked. You grew up in Houston suburbs. Comfortable neighborhoods. You attended private schools, Crockett continued, listing each step of Cruz's elite education. Then Princeton University, then Harvard Law School, where you graduated cum laude. You clerked for Supreme Court Chief Justice William Rehnquist, one of the most prestigious positions a young lawyer can get. You worked at a mega law firm. You became Texas Solicitor General through political connections. This is not a working-class background, Senator, Crockett said. This is elite Ivy League-connected privilege from start to finish. But you present yourself as a populist fighter for working Texans, she continued. You grew a beard to look tougher after people criticized your appearance. You emphasize your Cuban heritage while attacking immigrants. You wear cowboy boots and affect a draw, even though you spent your formative years in Canada and your career in elite institutions. Everything about your public persona is calculated performance, Crockett charged. Then she pulled out Cruz's voting record. Let's see how the fighter for working Texans votes on issues affecting working Texans. She began reading from the record. You voted against COVID relief packages that would have helped working families. You voted against infrastructure bills that would have created construction jobs. You voted against health care expansion. You voted against raising the minimum wage. You voted against paid family leave. You voted against child care support. You voted against union protections. On every single issue that actually helps working-class families, Crockett said, you vote no, but you give speeches about fighting for them. She produced comparison footage. During the February 2021 winter storm, while you were in Cancun, Beto organized wellness checks for elderly Texans. He wasn't even in office. He just did it because people needed help. You came back from Cancun and gave speeches about Texas values, Crockett said. That's the difference between performative populism and actual service. Let me tell you my background, Senator Crockett said, her voice rising with passion. I was born in St. Louis, Missouri. My father was a teacher and a preacher. My mother worked for the United States Postal Service. That's actual working class. I went to college. I went to law school. And you know what I did with my law degree? I became a public defender. I represented people who couldn't afford lawyers. I took pro bono cases for peaceful protesters. I defended families of police brutality victims. I've represented over 5,000 Texans in court. Crockett continued. Real people facing real problems, not corporate clients, not political cases. Regular Texans who needed someone to fight for them. Then I got into politics, she said, and I led the Texas House quorum break, walking out of the legislature to stop voter suppression. I put my political career on the line for principle, for voting rights, for democracy. What have you sacrificed, Senator? Crockett demanded. Your wife's feelings when Trump attacked her. No, you became his defender, your constituents' safety during a winter storm. No, you fled to Cancun. Democratic principles on January 6th. No, you tried to overturn the election. Your integrity on the podcast arrangement. No, you found a loophole to profit. You've never sacrificed anything, Crockett concluded. You've calculated everything for personal advantage, disguised it as principle, and wrapped it in this fake working-class populism. She pulled out photos of Cruz's home, his financial disclosures, his lifestyle. You're a millionaire senator with Ivy League degrees who's never wanted for anything. But you lecture working Texans about their values while voting against their interests. I'm the one who actually knows what working-class struggle means. Crockett said, my parents worked regular jobs. I defended poor people in court. I stood up to the Texas GOP establishment for voting rights. I didn't flee when it got hard. I fought. She looked directly at Cruz. You're not a champion of working Texans, Senator. You're a privileged elite using them as props for your political ambitions. And when they actually needed you, when they were freezing, when they were dying, you abandoned them for a beach resort. That's who you really are, Crockett said, not the cowboy boots and the beard and the affected accent. Those are costumes. The real you is the man who fled to Cancun, who hid in a supply closet, who apologized to Tucker Carlson, who profits from podcast arrangements while claiming it's a labor of love. She gathered all 5 folders together. Senator Cruz, you questioned my qualifications to serve in Congress. You called me a DEI hire, but I've proven something tonight that every Texan watching already suspected. I've done more to actually serve Texas in 2 years than you've done in 12. The CNN studio had fallen into an almost reverent silence. For the past hour, America had watched a civil rights attorney systematically dismantle a senator piece by piece, scandal by scandal, lie by lie. Jake Tapper, who'd moderated hundreds of debates, looked genuinely shaken by what he'd witnessed. This wasn't normal political combat. This had been an evisceration. Senator Cruz, Tapper said carefully. Congresswoman Crockett has presented... Senator Cruz, Tapper said carefully. Congresswoman Crockett has presented substantial evidence regarding your actions during the winter storm January 6th, your podcast arrangement, and your voting record. Would you like to respond? Ted Cruz sat motionless. The confident senator who'd opened the debate with condescending remarks about DEI hires now looked like a defendant who'd watched his defense attorney abandon him mid-trial. Jasmine Crockett stood, gathering her folders. "Let me summarize for the people of Texas," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone delivering a closing argument. Senator Cruz fled Texas when constituents were freezing to death. He lied about why he went to Cancun and when he planned to return. He only came back because he got caught. He led the effort to overturn the 2020 election. He objected to legitimate results even after rioters attacked the Capitol. He called it terrorism, then apologized for calling it terrorism. He profits from a podcast arrangement with a company he's supposed to regulate, funneling over $600,000 to his political committee while claiming he doesn't get paid. He submitted to Donald Trump after Trump insulted his family. He's hated by colleagues from both parties. He's shown a pattern of cowardice and self-interest throughout his entire career. And he's built this career on a lie, pretending to be a working-class champion while being an Ivy League elite who votes against working families on every issue. Crockett looked directly into the camera. "I'm a civil rights attorney. I've spent 15 years defending people who couldn't defend themselves, fighting for justice, standing up to power. That's what we're supposed to do in Congress," she continued. "Fight for people who need us. Serve our constituents, especially when it's hard. Stand on principle even when it costs us politically." Senator Cruz has done none of those things, Crockett said. He fled during crisis. He lied repeatedly. He profits while claiming service. He abandoned principle for ambition, and he lectures others about their qualifications while having no record of actual service to the people he claims to represent. "Texas deserves better than this," she concluded. "We deserve senators who show up during crisis, not flee to beach resorts, who defend democracy, not try to overturn it, who actually serve working people, not just use them as campaign props, who show courage, not cowardice." She looked back at Cruz one final time. "Senator, you called me an unqualified DEI hire at the start of this debate, but I've proven something tonight. I've represented more Texans, defended more people, and shown more courage and service than you have in your entire career. You earned your position through privilege and connections." Crockett said, "I earned mine through service and sacrifice. That's the difference between us. And Texas voters will remember that difference when you're up for re-election." The studio remained silent as CNN cut to commercial. The last image America saw was devastating. Ted Cruz, the senior senator who'd started the debate with condescending attacks, sitting in complete defeat, and Jasmine Crockett, the freshman congresswoman he dismissed as unqualified, standing with the quiet dignity of someone who just delivered the most comprehensive destruction of a senator in recent political history. The truth had a way of doing that. The immediate aftermath of Ted Cruz's public humiliation on CNN created shockwaves that extended far beyond Texas politics. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, the footage became the most shared political content across every social media platform. The clips were impossible to ignore. Cruz's condescending DEI hire comment. Crockett's calm. "Let's discuss why you fled Texas." The systematic presentation of evidence. The Cancun timeline. The wife's leaked texts, the January 6th supply closet revelation, the Tucker Carlson apology, the podcast payments, the cowardice with Trump, the privilege pretending to be populist. And throughout it all, Cruz unable to mount any effective defense, his usual quick political instincts, completely failing against an actual attorney with actual evidence. Fled Cruz began trending worldwide within an hour, reaching 500 million impressions. Crockett destroy AL Cruz hit 400 million. The old photos from Cancun resurfaced, Cruz with his luggage at the airport, the Ritz-Carlton, the timeline of abandonment. Texas social media exploded. Even some Republicans admitted she got him. Conservative commentators struggled to defend Cruz's actions, with many simply saying no comment when asked about the Cancun timeline or the January 6 flip-flops. Dallas erupted with pride for their congresswoman. Signs appeared. Dallas knows how to fight. Crockett's office was flooded with messages of support from constituents who'd felt dismissed and betrayed by Cruz's abandonment during the winter storm. The political impact in Texas was immediate and severe. A poll conducted 48 hours after the debate showed Cruz's approval rating had dropped 12 points from an already underwater 42% to a catastrophic 30%. His disapproval rating hit 63%, including 48% who strongly disapproved. Most devastating among Texas voters who'd lost power during the winter storm, his disapproval was 81%. They hadn't forgotten. Crockett had just reminded them why. The National Democratic Party immediately recognized Crockett's performance as a gaymaker. Within 24 hours, she'd received speaking invitations from every major Democratic event for the next year. Fundraising for a potential Senate challenge against Cruz exploded. $2 million raised in 48 hours entirely from small-dollar donors. Can Jasmine Crockett beat Ted Cruz became the headline across political news. The Texas Tribune ran a comprehensive analysis showing that while Texas remained Republican-leaning, Cruz was uniquely unpopular. In 2018, Beto O'Rourke had come within 6 percentage points of defeating him. After this debate performance, political analysts gave Crockett an even better shot. The Cancun scandal, which Cruz thought he'd weathered, was back in full force. Local Texas news stations ran retrospectives on the 2021 winter storm. They interviewed families who'd lost loved ones during the crisis. They showed Cruz at the airport again. The contrast with Beto organizing wellness checks became a viral comparison video. Republican strategists privately admitted the debate had been a disaster. He walked into a prosecutorial trap. One GOP consultant told the Texas Tribune on background, "She's a lawyer who's tried thousands of cases. She knew exactly how to present evidence." He came with political talking points. You can't political talk your way out of photographic evidence and your wife's text messages. Even Cruz's Republican colleagues maintained strategic silence. John Cornyn, Texas's senior senator, declined to comment. Dan Patrick said only every politician has to answer to their constituents. The Texas Republican Party issued no statement defending Cruz. The January 6th angle created renewed pressure for accountability. The original ethics complaint filed by 7 Democratic senators was referenced in dozens of news articles. Grassroots organizations launched campaigns demanding the Senate Ethics Committee investigate Cruz's role in the insurrection attempt. The clip of Cruz apologizing to Tucker Carlson for calling January 6th a terrorist attack went particularly viral. The cognitive dissonance, objecting to the election, hiding during the riot, returning to object anyway, calling it terrorism, then apologizing for calling it terrorism, became impossible for even his supporters to defend. The podcast Poliola arrangement faced renewed scrutiny. The Houston Chronicle ran a follow-up investigation. 2 more advertisers announced they were pulling out of Cruz's podcast. The Senate Ethics Committee received dozens of complaints demanding investigation into the iHeartMedia arrangement. Campaign finance reform groups used it as an example of legal corruption. Technically compliant with rules, but clearly designed to evade their intent. For Jasmine Crockett personally, the debate transformed her from rising star to national figure. Her Twitter following grew by 2 million in 48 hours. Her committee assignment suddenly carried more weight. When she spoke at House hearings, cameras focused on her. She was invited to Sunday political shows. Progressive organizations announced million-dollar commitments to support her future political ambitions. Most importantly, she'd proven something that resonated far beyond Texas. Authentic service trumps calculated political performance. The public defender who'd actually represented thousands of people had more credibility than the Ivy League lawyer who had built a career on connections and ambition. 3 months after the debate, Ted Cruz's poll numbers remained depressed. Democratic challenger announcements started appearing. Even some Texas Republicans were quietly encouraging primary challenges, seeing Cruz as increasingly toxic. The winter storm anniversary in February brought renewed media attention. Texas stations ran retrospectives featuring families who'd lost loved ones, people who'd suffered through freezing homes and the stark comparison. Beto organizing help, Cruz fleeing to Cancun. 6 months later, the political landscape in Texas had fundamentally shifted. Cruz, who'd been seen as safely ensconced in his Senate seat, now faced a genuinely competitive race. Crockett announced exploratory committee for a Senate run, raising $8 million in the first month, all from small donors. Her announcement video opened with Cruz's DEI hire comment, then showed her law degree, her public defender work, her civil rights cases, her representation of 5,000-plus Texans, her leadership on voting rights, her willingness to walk out of the legislature for principle. The tagline, "Texas deserves a senator who shows up." The contrast ads practically wrote themselves. Cruz at the Cancun airport, Crockett in court, defending clients, Cruz hiding in a supply closet, Crockett walking out of the Texas legislature for voting rights, Cruz apologizing to Tucker Carlson, Crockett presenting evidence on CNN. Political analysts noted that the CNN debate had accomplished something remarkable. It had taken Cruz's various scandals, Cancun January 6th, the podcast payments, the cowardice, the privilege, and woven them into a single coherent narrative of self-interest and abandonment. Fled Cruz wasn't just a nickname anymore. It was a comprehensive indictment of character supported by evidence that couldn't be spun away with political rhetoric. 1 year after the debate, as Cruz prepared for his 2024 re-election campaign, he faced the most difficult political environment of his career. His own party barely tolerated him. Independents viewed him as a coward who'd abandoned Texas. Democrats were energized by the possibility of defeating him. And Jasmine Crockett, the DI hire he'd dismissed so contemptuously, was preparing to challenge him with the backing of a coalition that crossed traditional political lines. People who valued courage over calculation, service over self-interest, and authenticity over performance. The attorney who'd represented thousands of Texans was ready to represent all of them in the Senate. And the senator who'd fled to Cancun was about to learn that some betrayals can never be explained away. Not with talking points, not with political spin, not with affected accents and cowboy boots. Texas remembered, and Texas was ready for change. Buff, if you made it this far, you've witnessed something extraordinary. A civil rights attorney who's actually fought for people's systematically exposed a senator who's only fought for himself. Smash that like button if courage beats cowardice. Subscribe for more content showing what real accountability looks like. Share this everywhere before the algorithms suppress it. Comment below. Should Ted Cruz resign? Can Jasmine Crockett beat him in 2024? How many other senators need this level of scrutiny? Let us know. Should turn on notifications. Because when authentic service confronts political ambition, democracy wins. This is what happens when someone who actually represented 5,000+ people faces someone who only represents himself. This is what happens when evidence defeats spin. God bless every public defender fighting for justice. God bless everyone who walked out of the Texas legislature for voting rights. God bless everyone who stayed in Texas to help during the crisis while their senator fled to a resort. The truth always comes out. Sometimes it just needs a skilled attorney to present the evidence.